Greetings, humans. Zach here, welcoming you to another book discussion with Sequestered Superlative. Every week we get together and talk about what it is we've been reading the week prior, how we feel about it, and how many times it did or didn't blow our minds. Current book calendar, upcoming reading, book discussion dates, and more can be found at sequesteredsuperlative.com. Enjoy the show. All right, here we go. This is discussion numero uno for 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. Some of the points we cover are the foreword by Martin Doidge and the insights into Peterson's background in foundational studies. The overture, how the book came to be and key ideas. The dominance hierarchy from top to bottom. The critical fine line between order and chaos. And how to find and exist in good friendships. Join us next week for discussion 2 for 12 Rules. First impressions. Spill your guts.
It read like the Bible.
It read like the Bible?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, I never really read the Bible, so I wouldn't know.
What?
But it read like I would feel like the Bible would be reading.
I don't think the Bible is like nearly as like
Succinct.
yeah. I thought it was cool. It was basically just like him talking, which was nice.
Yeah. You guys both have the audible version, right? So it's actually him talking.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but I've read some of the book as well.
Yeah.
And it really is just like the way that he lectures and the way that he talks, and it really just seems like somebody talking to you.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty easy to understand, like in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that the other day, how it's just super conversational, and it's very, very much how he talks is very well translated into the writing.
It does kind of meander around a little bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I feel like he does a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, I thought there's not quite tangents, but there's like these meandering, like scenic routes to the point that are kind of interesting, where stories get told and stuff. But I think it all gets out there eventually.
Yeah.
I did appreciate. It did start to worry me in the first chapter when I first started. I was like apprehensive that there wouldn't be a point because it just kind of went on and on about things, and I was waiting for him to like sum up and be like, "This is what this rule represents." And it eventually happened, which I appreciated. It was in the last couple lines though.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird. Like he starts off each chapter with the name of the rule, and then he talks about something else for like 30 minutes.
Right.
And then he explains how what he was talking about was that rule.
It's a bit of a noggin twister to kind of try to connect the dots before you get to the end. Kind of like it.
Yeah, you just kind of need to not do that.
Yeah. What about you, Josh? How do you feel about the stuff?
I honestly never really connected the way that he meant to stand up with your back straight or your shoulders straight. I don't know. What do you think he meant?
Well, to sum up in one line, to stand up straight with your shoulders back is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open.
Yeah.
I feel like that does sum it up.
Yeah. But to jump back a little bit, I thought the forward was pretty cool. Me and you, Jonathan, talked about this the other day a little bit, but how it's just that guy, Norman Doidge, I believe is how you say that, who's actually a pretty interesting dude. He wrote a cool book called The Brain's Way of Healing. His website's linked on there. It's kind of a interesting little flashy page. But it was cool to get a little bit of insight and hindsight and context for Peterson's life in general, and then like kind of the themes in his life that led up to the creation of this book, and some of the like modalities of thought that he is partial to that led to his insights, which we can see in the 12 Rules book.
Yeah. I actually don't know if I read the forward.
I thought it was cool. It's pretty short. It's just like a quick little quip.
I
And
don't think it was in the audiobook.
Oh, that's a bummer. It's good. I think the most notable thing in the whole forward was the apparent soul-deep need for Peterson to remind himself of humanity's capacity for evil and how quick things can turn bad from the best of intentions, and the dangers of subscribing to ideologies to the point of decorating his house with art from the Soviet realists and early communists. And he was just talking, the guy Norman Doidge is a close friend of Jordan Peterson's, and he said the first time he went over to Peterson's house and met his wife and came into the kitchen, he was just kind of taken aback because there's like all this like Soviet and like German art all over the walls. But it really gave him a deeper understanding for Peterson's need to have that like forefront, thinking about that all the time in order to like, figure out a way to make that not happen again.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then the overture, which is the actual foreword, I guess, written by Peterson, he basically outlines just the general pathway towards creating this book, which was the original post on the website Quora, where he had 40 rules in answer to the question, what are the most valuable things everyone should know? And then it kind of progressed from there. He got contacted, or he did a CBS radio broadcast about using some of the material that he wrote in the list of the 40 rules. And then he got contacted and asked or suggested that he write a book on those things. And then it all kind of just went from there, because he kind of took up the baton and started running. He goes on to outline some important themes or important words and ideas that he kind of uses throughout the rest of the book. And I think the most prominent one of those is his use of the word being, which he got from Martin Heidegger's basically totality of human experience, being, with a capital B. And he used that like every other sentence in the book. So it's good to get a little definition of that. I included a link to some background on that, like a little paper on it. And then he was explaining the title, that he basically decided that it indicates clearly that people need ordering principles, otherwise chaos beckons, because people require rules, standards, values, alone and together. So that's like the overture. That's basically, he just kind of goes through and chops up some information that he's going to use throughout the rest of the book, which is pretty, I guess it's useful. But that's when you start kind of getting a feel for like, that it really is just him talking in like written form. I thought it was going to just kind of made me laugh when I first started reading it. And then like Jordan, his online stuff, there's lots of like memes and funny quips about him talking about lobsters and their dominance hierarchy. So rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. He goes right into talking about the dominance hierarchy and how we study lobster nervous systems and how have large neurons, and it's easy for us to observe them and figure out what they're doing, and thereby figure out that their like neurochemical systems are how they relate to other animals, and understand the various situations and whatnot that are affected by those systems. He talks about the hierarchy, the dominance hierarchy being as a means of rectifying territorial disputes while causing the least amount of lasting harm to each individual, while providing a means for ultimate judgment through contest. So he's kind of talking about like evolution, how you obviously don't want to, at every time you need to go get a new piece of land that's someone else that they're already occupying, you don't want to like have to fight to the death every time. So evolution built in these serotonergic systems in animals' neurochemistry in order to allow them to have less than ultimate like to the death battles over territory and other mating and that kind of thing, in order to not die necessarily, unless it needs to be escalated to that.
Yeah.
Do you think that humans will evolve to the same way that lobsters evolved, to where they know exactly what the next step in the process is of determining who is superior? Like how they go from one step to the next, like to putting each other on the back, to the next, to level 4, to level this, to killing each other. Like whether, like in humans, how it's all a guessing game. Like you don't know what's next.
Well, I think that the whole rest of this chapter talks about, like, he's not talking about lobsters because they're different than us. He's talking about because they're the same, and it's just the most simple way to explain it, because it's very like clear and very succinct, and they don't have to like tell stories about it. But I mean, it is the same, and humans do that. So it seems like it's up in the air and uncertain, but the reason he's explaining about the lobster dominance hierarchy is because it's something that's universal to all animals. Or nearly all animals, any animal with a serotonin system, and in humans it just looks like, so it's like 99% subconscious or 100% subconscious, like as it is in a lobster, because arguably they're not conscious. They don't have self-consciousness like we do. So at our level it would be subconscious. So the rest of the thing is this first part of the introduction to the dominance hierarchy, using lobsters as an example, is explaining. It's just an analogy to humans, because we do the exact same thing. And then it goes on to talk about, and we can get deeper into it, but like courtship, and it goes to talk about the effects of being on the lower end or the higher end of the hierarchy. And he continues to use animals, swallows or finches or something, as well as lobsters, But he's just saying that because it's easier to understand than talking about a human, because humans are a little bit more complex. But that same hierarchy is at work in humans, which is why he's talking about it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our like, you know, male dominance and like mating rituals are probably just way more complicated than lobsters, but that doesn't mean that like if you lose one fight as a human, whether it's a real fight or a, you know, if somebody chooses somebody else over you, like that has a real effect on your brain,
Yeah, it
and
changes.
you're less likely to take that risk again.
Right.
Or like it's talking about with the lobsters, how like when a lobster loses, like it's more likely to keep losing.
Yeah, that gets that. And there's a quote. He says, "There is an unspeakably primordial calculator deep within you, at the very foundation of your brain, far below your thoughts and feelings. It monitors exactly where you are positioned in society." And then it goes on to explain the effects of being at the bottom and top, and basically, just like you said, being at the bottom engenders hypersensitivity and a proclivity to react rapidly and extremely, because change is threatening and because survival is the imperative rather than any sort of um, status seeking or anything. It's just live, and so that necessitates a very reactive mode of existence. And then goes to talk about being near the top of the hierarchy, switches change subjectively to a potential opportunity, and it allows for preferential selection of partners and resources without the anxiety of potential catastrophe.
Right.
And those are real things that happen to people, and as well as lobsters. So it's an interesting way to look at it when you just take a simple animal like a lobster, but you can directly see the parallels to people. But it's like it's like a look under the hood, because these processes are subconscious. We can see the effects of them, and we can feel the effects of them, but we don't necessarily we can't necessarily see or feel the mechanism directly. So we have to like learn about it through these external mechanisms of observing simpler creatures or simpler systems, to see exactly the like causality involved in like the serotonergic regulation, or positioning, or however you put it, of an individual animal in the dominant hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think really the main thing that I get out of this chapter is just like the fact that if you're doing well, you'll continue to do well.
Right.
And if you're doing bad, you're more likely to continue to do bad. And what that means is you can't just stop. Like
Yeah.
you can't just like continue the way that you are. You have to like do something to jumpstart yourself towards that positive loop. And I think that's why he says, to put your shoulders back and stand up straight, because like that's the first step to like assuming that things are going well for you.
Right.
Um, I want to say I think it was one of the weaker chapters, but I think it kind of gets a groundwork for some of the stuff he's talking about.
Yeah, I think in the second chapter in Rule 2, he actually explains Rule 1 better. And I'll get to that in a second. I don't know, we pretty much covered I think that's a really good summary of what this is about. Some interesting little points where he likes to talk about Price's Law, because of some of the political and nonsensical
Yeah.
stuff that he's been involved with, like in the news and whatnot, battles with people per se. He likes to reference Price's Law a lot because people tend to blame systems like capitalism or communism or any other ism or system or the patriarchy, things like that. And one of his de facto responses is about Price's Law, where you see unequal distribution of power and production in creative disciplines and in society in general, and every society in general, like ever, regardless of any governmental form or economic form or anything.
Yeah.
Definitely, for me, that just gives an amount of levity, an amount of, I don't know, it's almost comforting to be able to look at these things and not see some ulterior motive and know that it's just like how like animals work. When looking at, there's obviously negative things that happen because of like ideologies and systems, and that's kind of one of his points. But you look at them and you can't blame the system for things that it's definitely not responsible for, which is kind of his point in bringing out Price's Law.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much like competition most of the time. Like naturally, there's a lot of competition. And the way that competition works and how there's so many like zero sum games, like once you win, it's just easier to keep winning.
Right.
And so, I mean, I can see that I don't know. I don't think that a lot of the people that disagree with him, whether they say they think it's true or not, I think they're more of saying they want to try to fight against that aspect.
Right.
But I think he's just saying it's natural and you probably can't. The other thing is, I don't think he's necessarily saying that it's good.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely not. He's just saying it's a thing,
Saying, like it's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is interesting, just to know that that is like that's the norm.
Yeah. I think that's also like a big aspect of this book in general, or throughout, is that a lot of it's not like do this or do that. Like there is a lot of that. Don't get me wrong. Probably there's more of that than not, but there's a significant portion of it that is just pointing out the things. This is the way
Yeah.
things are. This is what evolution brought us to, and this is the metaphysical state of this, and whether or not some of those are interpretations or not, a lot of them are just stating things, and then maybe drawing some tangential conclusions that produce the rule.
Yeah.
So mating and the diamondarchy, kind of already talked about that, and then he goes to one more thing I want to talk about is the last part of this chapter is rising up, which he's basically the first 3/4 of the rule one. He's talking about all the things that hinder or make it more difficult to stand up straight with your shoulders back, the things we have to move against or away from or contend with, whether they be the dominance hierarchy or just innate parts of humanity, or other innate parts of humanity. And then the last part, rising up, he goes to talk about what it takes and how and what it looks like to kind of start moving up out of those things as an unconscious like state of being and into the state of standing up with straight with your shoulders back. Basically, he talks about skillfully integrating violence and aggression, because doing that actually decreases the probability that actual aggression will become necessary, which is it's not quite counterintuitive, but because it makes sense if you think about it, because it's like the bigger stick argument. If you have the bigger stick, you're much less likely to have to use it, because not only do you know, but everyone else knows that you do have it, and the results would be catastrophic for both sides if it got used.
Yeah, I don't know how much he talks about it in this book. I don't recall it specifically, but he'll talk a lot about how I think he says how like in the Bible it says the meek will inherit the earth or something. Like he talks about how what meek means is the people that know how to defend themselves or know how to use their swords but don't, unless they need to.
Right.
That or how basically like you want to be a monster
Yeah.
and then choose to do the right thing.
I loved on Joe Rogan, there was that one episode where he gave like 2 or 3 different definitions of monster. Joe was like, but you don't want to be a monster, right? And he's like, no, you want to be a monster. Absolutely. But he's like, what about this kind of monster? And he's like, oh no, you don't want to be that kind of monster. Or maybe you do.
You just want to like I don't know, like he talks about somewhere where like a lot of people do the right thing because like they have to, or like a lot of people are not violent because they know they would lose, and like if they didn't think they would lose, they probably would be violent, and there's not really any like morality to that, or like that's just like being a loser,
Yeah.
whereas if you like are capable of doing things and affecting things and then you choose to do it in a good way, like that's much better.
Yeah.
That's you have to be capable of doing wrong before doing right is like something that, applaudable.
Yeah.
I think it's just like expounding on the Spider-Man line of "with great power comes great responsibility."
I swear, didn't he quote that in this? Did he quote that in this book or something? I swear that was quoted
I
either
feel like
here.
he has somewhere.
Yeah, I read it somewhere. It might have been in the overture or something. I'm not sure. I really like this quote about that, about people that are quote unquote losers, and the transition and what you have to do, the process of getting towards recognizing power inside yourself. When the awakening occurs, when once naive people recognize in themselves the seeds of evil and monstrosity and see themselves as dangerous, at least potentially, their fear decreases. So that's talking about people that haven't been conscious of their innate abilities, or the just human baseline of potential for good or evil, quote unquote, when that starts to be recognized, or when they do something that reveals it inside themselves to themselves, then you start to gain confidence and you are less afraid of things because of self-awareness, which, can tend negative or positive, but it definitely increases the I don't know, I guess confidence is probably what that instills the most.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that a lot of the time people will have a different opinion of themselves, uh, than is accurate, and then they will do things that are terrible, and then they're like surprised by it.
Right.
Whereas, like, I think a lot of the time you need to acknowledge certain parts of your nature, and only then are you able to like deal with them.
Right. Yeah, he talks about a lot, because he is a psychiatrist, about like PTSD and stuff, and that's basically what it is. When you do something that you didn't think or don't believe or haven't admitted that you're capable of, you react to it. You're reactionary towards that, and that's what causes PTSD, when you can't justify that to yourself. You can't accept that part of yourself, because you didn't know or admit that that was inside of you, or you're capable of it. So the opposite of that, doing things like that, having experiences, putting yourself out there and doing things you haven't done or didn't think you could do before, and not reacting negatively, or not letting the reaction to the thing overcome you, is how you decrease fear and gain confidence.
Yeah.
And then he kind of goes on right before he gives his little one line about what it is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. He says, standing up physically also implies and invokes and demands standing up metaphysically. Standing up means voluntarily accepting the burden of being, which is kind of a big thing, a big statement, although it kind of makes sense. We have to remember that by being, with a capital B, he's talking about the totality of human experience. So everything that you experience internally, externally, existentially, and everything that everyone around you, their experience as well as the overall, humanity, and how that's all connected back to you. So that's the thing that you're that is necessarily accepted as a burden, after basically the start of the path is recognizing or gaining confidence and lessening fear in yourself, physically, to a certain extent. And then through doing that, you kind of learn, or it dawns on you, or you eventually, someone tells you that what that means is that after that, the next thing is to start to like look at yourself in terms of being.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that was exhaustive and ridiculous.
Yeah, I just think it boils down to, like, realize that you need to get in a positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
That the first way to do that is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like he went into a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
For a relatively simple concept, but I think he continues to build off of it. So
Yeah. I think.
first chapter is.
But yeah, rule two definitely builds on rule one in an interesting way, which I have something in here about that. Yeah. So rule one definitely had a bunch of disparate elements that kind of tied in or didn't tie in, or just kind of like set the framework for the rest of this. For my notes, you'll see that most of the stuff going forward is quotes from him, because more of what he says is like succinct and like pertains to the rule in the chapter. And some of it I've paraphrased and stuff. But so like there was an initial part of this rule too where he kind of just talked about things, which was interesting. But then this is a quote that kind of starts it off, and I really, really like it. The scientific world of matter can be reduced, in some sense, to its fundamental constituent elements, molecules, atoms, and even quarks. However, the world of experience has primal constituents as well. These are the necessary elements whose interactions define drama and fiction. One of these is chaos, another is order. The third, as there are three, is the process that mediates between the two, which appears identical to what modern people call consciousness. It is our eternal subjugation to the first two that makes us doubt the validity of existence, that makes us throw up our hands in despair and fail to care for ourselves properly. It is proper understanding of the third that allows us the only real way out. And that's pretty much the theme of this, is that there's order and there's chaos. And then there's the consciousness, and And the juggling act of through consciousness of order and chaos is basically the thing that either leads to successfully standing with your shoulders back and understanding that you're worth helping, or it tends toward chaos, or the unsuccessful juggling of that tends towards chaos and introduces like nihilistic characteristics into like people's character and existences.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this concept. Definitely seems correct to me that there's chaos and there's order, and then if you have too much of either, then like you have a problem. There definitely is like a middle ground that you want.
Yeah, I
It's more
like
of like a flow
right.
situation than it is a everything has to be exactly the same or
Yeah,
no rules at all.
like do this, this, and that, and you'll be eternally in order.
Yeah.
It's the fine line. I like that you say it feels right, because another thing he says is we eternally inhabit order, surrounded by chaos. We eternally occupy known territory, surrounded by the unknown. We experience meaningful engagement when we mediate appropriately between them. We are adapted in the deepest Darwinian sense, not to the world of objects, but to the meta-realities of order and chaos, yang and yin. Chaos and order make up the eternal, transcendent environment of the living, which is kind of like, it kind of hits that nail on the head when you say this feels right, because that's like admitting that a meta reality like suits your like mental state, like almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just when you look at your life, like there are times when things are too orderly and it's just boring.
Yeah,
You know, you do the same thing every day. You don't, you know, it's just, it's boring. But then there are other times when things might be chaotic and you don't want that either because that's stressful. But ideally, it's like a combination of the two where you have like a base of order and then you are able to like venture out into the chaos for specific reasons and like exploration and
right.
things like
Yeah, he talks about the line that divides the comfortable order place of order from chaos. It's important to find the line that divides those places, chaos and order, because that's how we grow. That's how we remain alert and engaged, and that's how you improve your surroundings. Because, you know, like you just said, if everything stayed and you're defensive about your little bubble, then you're basically somnolent to like possibilities and things that introduce any amount of uncertainty, which are inherently chaotic and potentially fear-inducing. But you know, moving towards those things without going overboard and like succumbing to the chaos is what like grows you as a person. That's the honing element of life.
yeah. Yeah, I think so.
I like this little quote. He was like, "Perhaps heaven is something you must build, and immortality is something you must earn." And I like that he has these little quips, and like he doesn't really mean what that looks like it means on the first glance. He just means like it's probably good to like keep growing and like tread that line on the edge of order and chaos, because if you don't do that, or because that's the only way to like improve your life and
Right.
become like a better human, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think it's like less about trying to act a certain way so that you end up in heaven or hell as it is acting a certain way so that you can create those things around you,
Right.
which I think is a interesting metaphor that
Sure.
seems fairly accurate.
I like how he uses, you know, heaven and immortality, those two words, and they have so much baggage, but he manages to present them. It's a one sentence paragraph in between a couple of others, but he manages to present it in such a way where you don't feel the baggage necessarily. You kind of get the point, which I really like, because those, you know, a lot of people have quite negative reactions to the baggage on those words,
Yeah.
but being able to understand them in a different light, or at least in the that flows with the point he's trying to make, is really interesting. I think it kind of testifies to the I don't know, the flow of logic in this chapter at least. He goes on to talk about evil, basically. He goes to talk about like original sin. Here he has this quote: "We can terrify other people consciously. We can hurt and humiliate them for faults we understand only too well. We can torture them, literally, slowly, artfully, and terribly. That's far more than predation. That's a qualitative shift in understanding. That's a cataclysm as large as the development of self-consciousness itself. That's the entry of the knowledge of good and evil into the world. That's a second, as yet unhealed fracture in the structure of existence. That's the transformation of being into a moral endeavor, all attendant on the development of sophisticated self-consciousness. Only man could conceive of the rack, the Iron Maiden, and the thumbscrew. Only man will inflict suffering for the sake of suffering. He says that's the best definition of evil that I've been able to formulate. And then he kind of ties into that. And he's like always relating back to evolution, the Darwinian genesis of certain traits and things in humans. And he says our evolution, he basically says our evolution, selecting for higher brain capacity, giving rise to self-consciousness gave rise to this quote unquote original sin, this capacity for evil, because of the introduction of the existential, basically. But then he's like, perhaps it is not only this, but also that one's unwillingness to stand up straight with shoulders back, quote unquote, to walk with God, despite the hardships entailed, that gives rise to the negative expressions of humanity's capacities. I thought that's a pretty like huge thing said in a few lines. Where he's like, this is how you know that evil exists. This is probably innate to humanity, but it's probably not the only reason that people do bad stuff.
I mean, it's pretty on point.
Yeah. He also goes on to kind of qualify a couple paragraphs down where he says Christ, he says it in more words, but he says Christ's death is the archetypal example of this. So evil, that's a crazy thing to talk about, to think about, and think about where it arises from and how it came into being, or where its existence springs from, and how that relates to us as animals and higher beings or whatever.
Yeah, it is interesting how basically the thing that separates humans from most other animals is like the ability to like imagine what things would be like, to like sort of see in the future, like if I drag all these rocks over here and then pile them up, like it'll look like this, and I can
Sure.
like animals don't, for the most part, like can barely do that, and they definitely don't do anything like torture people or like torment people, or like that's is uniquely human. It's because we can imagine how that would feel.
Maybe uniquely human and dolphin.
Maybe, but yeah,
Dolphins fuck around and poke people
that's
and
true. Yeah, they are
bother
supposed to.
people, and they fuck with sharks.
Dolphins eat sharks.
Yeah, they're crazy guys.
They don't mess around, man.
There was a cool little line. He said, being brought into existence through true speech is good. He's doing a little talk about Genesis 1 and about, God birthing the universe through talking about it. But I think his point there is that basically telling the truth and the life that you get, the life situations that you produce that are the result of telling the truth all the time, that being, capital B, is good, capital G, because it's made of truth, basically.
Yeah.
Which is pretty intuitive, tell the truth and you get good stuff. Good stuff will come to you. Obviously, it's not like a cure-all, but it definitely goes a long ways towards like paving the road.
Plus, it feels better.
Yeah, it's apparent. I think that's why he used the word being, because it's apparent like inside yourself and outside yourself, existentially, and to everyone else when you are living truly or speaking true. And I think that ties back kind of into the dominance hierarchy, because if you're actively being true or speaking truly, the life you're creating for yourself is probably going to, if not solely by that fact, trend upwards in the hierarchy. It will at least be apparent that you're not trending downwards.
But that begs the question of like, what about, how he's talking about how 85 people out of the 7 billion have like most of the wealth. I bet you money at least half of those 85 people didn't get there by telling the truth, but they got there by like evil means.
Well,
Why?
I think that's kind of a separate issue, though, because being wealthy or rich has almost nothing to do with having a good existence.
Yeah, I guess Trump seems like he's pretty much loving it.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe. I don't know. I
Right?
can't.
Or maybe up until the presidency.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The thing I find interesting about telling the truth, and then the other thing I feel like goes hand in hand with telling the truth is, um, when you say something, meaning it and following through with it,
yeah,
is like, in a weird way, it's like sort of like you're telling the future,
yeah,
and then it's also like you're accurately explaining like the past.
mm,
And like it's just not stressful either, which is really nice. Like you don't have to remember the what actually happened and the version of something. You don't have
Yes.
to remember what you told somebody and what you meant.
Yeah. The proverbial web of lies, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not fun to do that, and often you have to respin it.
Yeah. I mean, if you say that, like, if you ask me if I'm going to show up for today's book club and I say yes, but I know that, like, I'm probably not going to,
I'd
it's just
I'd
worse.
whip out the bug spray, bro.
It's, it's just like, I'm going to think about that all day. And, like,
Like I feel bad.
well, it's going to be on my mind. Like, it's going to be on my conscience.
Right.
Like, whether or not I feel very bad about it, like
Yeah.
we do it for certain reasons, but like, it's just something that I'm going to have to be aware of.
Yeah.
And I've just found that, like, the less you do that, the better, because like you just have one version of reality to keep track of,
Right.
and like that's enough most of the time.
Yeah. Next, he says, "You're not simply your own possession to torture and mistreat. This is partly because your being is inexorably tied up with that of others, and your mistreatment of yourself can have catastrophic consequences for others." Kind of ties into what you're saying on a more extreme level. That if you are actively engaged in multiple reality bookkeeping, then the potential for like bad things to happen, you know, exponentially multiplies because of the fact that you are not just responsible to yourself. You're responsible to, yourself, how you relate to others, how others relate to you, and all these other things. Because that's, at least if you're taking the steps towards walking, standing up straight with your shoulders back, because you've accepted the burden of being. So it kind of ties back in there. So he goes on to kind of qualify that despite kind of the negative intonations of this section, talking about the negative possibilities of being of chaos and order, he says, some people degenerate into the hell of resentment and the hatred of being, but most refuse to do so, despite their suffering and disappointments and loss, inadequacies and ugliness. And again, that is a miracle for those with the eyes to see it. So he's saying, despite all these potential pitfalls, most people don't succumb to them. Like the majority of people, if not consciously, at least by chance or subconsciously, choose to like kind of take the higher road and at least trend towards like better things instead of becoming full of hate and resentment, which is good. It's a good little hopeful note.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I find really interesting about this chapter, and I guess I don't know if he talks about it here, but he's talked about it before in relation to this chapter, in some of his talks and stuff, um, is like, not only do you want to treat yourself as if you were someone you were responsible for or you were helping. He talks about like the golden rule and how you want to, when you say you want to treat other people how you want to be treated, like the first thing you need to do is really look at the way that you want to be treated, because
Right.
a lot of the time, and I feel like this goes with the way people degenerate. I feel like a lot of the time, if you really want somebody to like not do well, one of the main things you need to do is like enable them
Right.
and like let them continue in their like self-destructive, ways, or like things like that, because then they never have to stand up straight, and then they never have to like treat
Yeah.
themselves the way that somebody's responsible.
Yeah. I mean, that ties in to like if you've ever experienced or known someone that's experienced like recovery or any kind of addiction. They talk a lot about hitting rock bottom. I think that is exactly what you're talking about. If you don't go down to the bottom, okay, he has this quote. He says it way better than I do. Once having understood hell, researched it, so to speak, particularly your own individual hell, you could decide against going there or creating that. You could aim elsewhere. You could, in fact, devote your life to this. That would give you a meaning, with a capital M.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is, that's exactly what that is. Like, if you're enabled and you are allowed to steer your ship into uncharted waters, or they're probably charted because people have done these things before. But if you're allowed to do that, then you're much less likely to quote unquote hit rock bottom or explore your own hell and learn about it and learn that that's not where you want to go, which is critical. You need to learn. He says you need to know where you are so you can start to chart your course. You need to know who you are so that you can understand your armament and bolster yourself in respect to your limitations. You need to know where you're going so that you can limit the extent of chaos in your life, restructure order, and bring the divine force of hope to bear in the world. And I think that's a big element of being enabled and being in a situation where, with unlimited resources or negative possibilities, is that there's not a lot of hope. When you see people that are well endowed with money and resources, and they commit suicide or they appear miserable, they're enabled completely, and yet they seem to be without hope. Because they're not forced to confront hell. They're not forced to discover the things inside themselves and outside themselves that are desirable, and chart their course and figure out what they want and what they need. He kind of sums up and says, to treat yourself as if you were someone you are responsible for helping is, instead, to consider what would be truly good for you. And he kind of qualifies and says, truly good for you isn't what you want or what you need. It's like the things that would increase the propensity for like positive being. So like improving the totality of human experience in relationship to yourself is how you treat yourself as if you were someone you're responsible for helping.
Yeah, I think it's in the book. He talks about the Simpsons guy drinking the
Yeah, that was
thing
right.
of mayonnaise, and
Yeah, that was the line before
it's
this.
like
Yeah.
tomorrow me is gonna really regret this.
No, he said this is a problem for future Homer. I don't envy
Yeah,
him. Yeah.
yeah.
Which is great because
Like we do that all the time, like
yeah.
in slightly less obvious ways.
Yeah, he gave a talk the other day. I was listening to a lecture when he was talking about saying to hell with it, or because we're American, we don't say that, saying fuck it, is akin to inviting hell into your mode of being, into your existence. It's like opening the door and being like, I want hell here. And whatever hell is for you, if that's being poor, being alone, being, whatever it is, that saying fuck it in any situation is like saying, I want that right now. Or at least at some point in the future. That's okay. I would like that to come here. That's opening the door to that, which is why he says that's like the another way of explaining the necessity for the rules is that if there aren't rules, if you're not going by some sort of code, if you're not or at least intuitively taking the steps implied by the rules, then you're inviting hell in.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Like, even if all you do is every day, anytime you say, "Oh fuck it, I'm gonna go eat this," garbage food, or I'm gonna skip the gym, or I'm gonna, anything productive like that. Like, just to be aware of the fact that what you're doing is like hurting your future self and inviting like a worse future.
Yeah.
I don't mean that you can never skip those things, but maybe you shouldn't.
Right. Yeah, I think that a really heavy hitting little closing thing he says here is, it would be good to make the world a better place. Heaven, after all, will not arrive of its own accord. We will have to work to bring it about and strengthen ourselves so that we can withstand the deadly angels and flaming sword of judgment that God used to bar its entrance. Which is basically, that kind of ties into the saying fuck it. I mean, if we are to speak truth, but to truly create or invite or produce the heaven in our lives that we desire or that is truly good for us, then you have to be strong and push forward with your shoulders back while treating yourself as if you're someone you're responsible for helping, because metaphorically, the gate to the Garden of Eden is barred, and that those bars are doubt, fear, the dominance hierarchy. These things that are inherent to being human are the things that guard the entrance to the self-created heaven that's possible.
Yeah. I guess I would kind of look at it like, if I was like somebody's personal trainer, like I would probably be harder on them than I would me.
Oh, for sure.
And like, fuck, I care about me more than I care about them.
Yeah.
Most likely.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah,
I
it
th-
really is.
I don't know if it's this next one or the first. No, it's this one where he talks about like animals. He talks about taking care of pets, and he's like,
Yeah,
not like 100% of people are like 100% of people are like 100% more likely to take better care of their animals than they are of themselves, because like we inherently if we haven't started down this path, if we haven't started on the path of self-realization, basically is what he's saying, then we basically have this inherent negative connotation of ourselves, of our like identities, like subconsciously, and we like denigrate ourselves to the point of like less importance than other things when it comes to taking medicine. He was talking about people that get organ transplants and they have to take this medication once every day, and they don't take it and they die, or they get sick and their organs get rejected, and all they had to do is take a pill once a day. But they didn't because they have this. It's not like a conscious, like, I hate myself, though sometimes it is. It's more like a subconscious, your own subconscious hierarchy. You're lower on it than like other things, whether that's a distracting thing like TV or food or something else. You think less of yourself than you would other things like a pet, and that can cause crazy things like not taking the medication that will keep you alive if you only have to take it once a day. But he's
Yeah,
saying,
that's insane.
yeah, but saying that that's inherent to everyone, and like the knowledge of that is key. I think the knowledge of that is key. Like knowing that there's the potential for, or knowing that I already probably think less of myself than I should, basically, allows me to start thinking better of myself. And that's obviously the kind of the point of this book, is to kind of reveal these things and lay out some steps and potential solutions. But I think that that's kind of really salient to underlie everything, with the qualifier that these things are, it's mostly just knowledge. And this is kind of what I said at the beginning, that it's just like a lot of things, just points out a lot of things, and knowing those things makes you more likely to like not do those things, or to avoid them, or to overcome them.
Yeah, definitely.
The next chapter is rule 3: make friends with people who want the best for you. So basically, there was like an interesting, just like the last chapter, he kind of goes yada yada for a little bit, which is good. It was a good yada yada. It definitely helped. But then what he says to basically kick it off is, he says, people create their worlds with the tools they have directly at hand. Faulty tools produce faulty results. Repeated use of the same faulty tools produces the same faulty results. It is in this manner that those who fail to learn from the past doom themselves to repeat it. It's partly fate, it's partly inability, it's partly unwillingness to learn, refusal to learn, motivated refusal to learn. I guess that ties into what I just said, because if you don't know these things, if you don't know these things that are subconscious, that are, facts of evolution, that are part of the animal nature of being a human, you're much less likely to overcome them. You obviously don't know about them, so you can't like do anything about them consciously. And the people that don't know these things, which is a lot of people, they are going to continually butt their heads against these things that they don't know about, and the results will mostly be the same, and they'll mostly be negative, or not as good as they could be if they did know about them. And he's talking about this to point out that the people that don't know these things are probably not good friends, because if they don't know what's best for themselves, basically, how are they going to know what's best for you? It's kind of the whole theme there, is self-knowledge and knowing how you relate to other things, other parts of being.
Yeah, and it seems like whether or not they should know better or might know, but just aren't doing it, like
Right.
it's just really just the actions are what's important.
Yeah, because you can't,
Everybody kind of knows.
yeah, everyone kind of knows, because it's inherently part of us, and it always has been.
Yeah, it's just interesting how like frequently, or how easy it is to use someone else's like inability to do the right thing as an excuse for your own. Um, like if none of my friends are into like doing anything productive, then like why should I try to?
Yeah, he goes on to say, people will often accept or even amplify their own suffering as well as that of others if they can brandish it as evidence of the world's injustice. Which kind of ties on to the end of what you said.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, it's like the easy hard way out. It definitely hurts more, but in the long run. But in the meantime, you might feel a little bit better about yourself in kind of a pitying sense, if you
The
can.
interesting thing about like having an opinion like that is, like the world is unjust. Like you
Sure.
really just have two options. Like either it is unjust and you're fucked, or like it's not unjust, in which case you shouldn't mope around.
Right.
And even if it is unjust, like you still shouldn't mope around. You should just try.
Yeah.
Like it can't be worse. Like trying won't be worse than not trying.
Yeah.
And if it's not unjust, then like fuck, just try it, you know?
Yeah.
It's the constant battle against the misery that loves company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if everything is unjust, like the correct response still seems to be to pretend that it's not.
Yeah, he definitely goes. Speaking of misery loves company, he basically talks about a couple of reasons why people do choose friends that aren't good for them. Before he describes why you should or how you should choose friends that are good for you, he says people choose friends who aren't good for them for other reasons too. Sometimes it's because they want to rescue someone, and he goes on to kind of qualify that a little bit, talking about being oppressive and tyrannical is the easy way out, moment to moment, though it leads to hell in the long run. He's saying that that's potentially if you're forming friendships or looking for people in relationships and you're quote unquote wanting to save them, a lot of the time that's because that's a result of having an oppressive demeanor and being like delusional about that and what that like the results of that will be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's one of the things he mentions in his like 40 rules for life or whatever.
the big list.
Yeah, is not only be careful who you let help you, but be careful who you help.
Right.
Um, because a lot of the time the motivation behind either of those can just be wrong. And like it's so hard to receive it's so hard for someone else to solve your problems, and it's so hard for you to solve someone else's problems.
Right. He says it's not easy to distinguish between someone truly wanting and needing help and someone who is merely exploiting a willing helper. And then, like at the very end, I don't know if I got any of this out of there, but then so he was talking about the motivations between wanting to help someone, why they're mostly potentially probably bad, and then he goes on to qualify. Well, he tells a story in there about a man telling a woman who's heading towards being a prostitute to come talk to him, and
Yeah, in
then
Crime and Punishment, I think.
yeah, and then she comes eventually after a long time. But before she comes, this guy's sitting at home fantasizing about the savior complex, about she's gonna come to him and he's gonna like save her life and she's gonna fall at his feet and like worship him basically. And Peterson says that that's obviously completely delusional and he's the only one that's benefiting from that. She's obviously being destroyed. And then she eventually does come and shows up at this guy's place, and he just rails at her about his own like nihilistic nonsense, where he's like, "You really expected me to like? I was actually laughing at you. I actually got in an argument with someone, and then I couldn't get back at this person because they left, so I came and got back at him through you."
Yeah, it's interesting how he blames her, like her issues, for that happening.
Right.
Like nothing's wrong with him.
Yeah.
It's her. Like why would you have believed me? You know?
Yeah. And then she's just like in shock because she realizes immediately how like broken and like fucked up this guy is. Like she just knows. She's like, oh my god, like this man is like completely like absorbed by this like crazy his crazy self. But it's not crazy. This rationalized idea of himself, where he thinks that this is like the thing that's like what should have been done, or like that's what happens as a result of just his like him being.
And I feel like a lot of the time people do try to help people, and instead of it being in their imagination, like the cycle kind of does go like that. Like you help them for a while and they're really thankful, and then like it normalizes, and then like you realize that it wasn't really something you wanted to do anyway, now that you don't feel good about it, or now that it doesn't make you feel better, and then like it just breaks and you're like, why would you have trusted me for this?
Yeah, you're like, clearly I'm a bad guy. Why didn't you know? Like I knew.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm here to
Why are
tell
you
you.
still here?
Yeah. He
Yeah.
says after that story, he says a villain who despairs of his villainy has not become a hero. A hero is something positive, not just the absence of evil. And he's kind of talking about the determining factors, the ways, the methodology to determine if a relationship, if you're getting into a relationship or a friendship, um, is motivated by these potential like savior complex or other not correct motivations. He says when evaluating the motivation behind friendships chosen, assume first that you're doing the easiest thing and not the most difficult. The easiest thing being these negative things, like trying to save someone for the wrong reasons, or trying to get something out of them. that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He says, vice is easy, failure is easy too. It's easier not to shoulder a burden. It's easier not to think and not to do and not to care. It's easier to put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today and drown the upcoming months and years in today's cheap pleasures. In which he's talking about looking for friends and these people that you potentially might think you want to save, or your relationship, the motivation for a friendship or relationship is based on those feelings, conscious or not. You have to realize, you have to hold it in the forefront of the determining mechanism that you are employing to see if it's a valuable friendship or not, that it's pretty likely that if you think you should save them, number one, well, if you think you should save them or that's the motivation, then it's pretty likely that they're not going, like, that's the hard thing to do, is to be saved or to save. And you have to realize that the negative pleasures and vices are much easier than submitting or lending, saving. He says, this is kind of a summary. He says, if and when it's discovered or decided that you're engaging in the easy things in regards to a friendship, or that the potential friend is a user, abuser, or lacks the will to reciprocate, maybe instead of continuing our friendship, he kind of says jokingly, but seriously, he says, maybe instead of continuing our friendship, I should just go off somewhere, get my act together, and lead by example.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that that's a valid question that needs to be asked in most like relationships.
Yeah.
It's just a hard question.
Yeah. I like that he kind of puts that, waits till the end to say that, because he's like, there's all these things, all these potential pitfalls, like in friendships and, developing relationships and friendships. Like, here's here's a bunch of things that could potentially go wrong. Here's kind of what to look out for. It's probably not going to work if any things are the case. But anyways, if you have any of these questions or any of these flags come up, you probably should just go off and figure shit out. Like, it's probably a bad idea in the first place. You probably should stop thinking about it. Because of like the propensity for all these things to actually go bad. Like, that's probably where they're going to go. If these things are there in their infancy or at all, it probably will go the wrong way. And there's probably the wrong motivations. And then he kind of goes to the positive end about like what to do, what things are. He says, friendship is a reciprocal arrangement. You're not morally obliged to support someone who is making the world a worse place. Quite the opposite. You should choose people who want things to be better, not worse. It's a good thing, not a selfish thing, to choose people who are good for you. It's appropriate and praiseworthy to associate with people whose lives could be improved if they saw your life improve. Which, that's like so intuitive. I think he waited till the end to say that because it's so intuitive. If he would have said that first, the rest of the stuff would have been brushed off. I feel like, or I would have brushed it off if I read that first. I would have been like, okay, that's the point. We're good. Like, but
I think a lot of this book is like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that it seems objectively correct that if people aren't good for you, then you kind of need to leave them alone for a little bit and find something that is good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for myself, and I know for Zach, we definitely experienced that exact situation with their own best friends, where it gets to a point where somebody's doing something in the friendship where it's negatively affecting the other one to the point where they need to separate themselves for a period of time, and they tell the other person they're wrong, and the other person doesn't know it, but they call them later admitting that they were.
Sometimes to love somebody, you got to be a stranger.
Right. And I know
it's interesting. Like, a lot of the time, if you don't, like, you're going to be enabling them.
Right. Just by the fact of just being there.
Yeah, like just being like, unless you're like actively like calling them out on all their shit, which I don't know if that's always a good thing to do either. Like, by not doing that though, you're also like sort of giving it your approval.
Yeah, it's like it goes into like codependency and stuff, which I'm really glad he didn't start talking about, because number one, it would be its own book. Number two, I don't know. I think that a lot of these things are simpler than diving into the codependency issue, because the codependency thing springs from these issues. These are more of the core issues, these rules. So,
I think the interesting thing about codependency too is that if one person steps away, then it's broken. So like you could be the one that starts it.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's why he doesn't.
Yeah.
needs to go into it, because if you just walk away, then like they aren't codependent anymore and they have to figure their shit out too.
Right.
I think is kind of like the side effect of a lot of these rules. Like if you just started living the right way, the people around you that were using you for a like support might have to do as well.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy because you accepted the burden of being, you create this kind of like aura in your sphere of existence, basically, that is more or less uplifting. Just because it's not like, because it's not the opposite. It's not like, it's not dragging anything down.
Yeah. I mean, like just from my personal life, like I know people that like their parents continue to give them money like into their late 20s,
Mm-hmm.
and because of that they still work shitty jobs like that they are more than overqualified for,
Sure.
and things like that. And it's like, if you don't ever have to do anything, why would you?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really interesting. Like uh I think you mentioned like something like suicides and stuff earlier. um like I wonder if there are more suicides from that kind of like slow, drawn out, unhappy like desperation, but like nothing's obviously wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
Whereas like if things are really bad, like most of the time you're like, fuck, I need to change something.
yeah. I
Things
mean,
are like kind of bad and you're okay, but you're not like, but people are supporting you, and it seems like there's a middle ground between like good and bad and like really bad.
yeah.
And like it's a weird kind of like lukewarm that really destructive.
Yeah, I mean, if you've never dipped your toes into chaos, if there's no rub, then
Yeah.
there's no impetus to improve. There's no impetus to seek like what could potentially be good, like the antidote to the negative like feelings of being enabled that are engendered by being enabled and having no struggle, um,
Yeah. It's
is
kind of like
is the
how,
struggle. Like it's weird, like because like struggling, like having no struggle, the antidote to that is struggling. Like
mhm,
the antidote to the negative things that are brought about by the enabling non-struggling state of being, are the solution to that is to go struggle a little bit. It's like to go fuck around and go do some potentially bad things and deal with the consequences. But in doing that, you're going to learn like what you are, what you want to do, where you want to go, and then you can move forward with that.
yeah, it's like how it's like so much better to be like finally broken up with somebody than it is to be like in the few months before when you know it's gonna end, but like waiting, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like then you can take action because it's bad enough, you
Yeah.
know.
He says two really like short, sweet ones are, it's for this reason that every good example is a fateful challenge and every hero a judge. I don't know if it was in this chapter or the first one where or maybe not even in this book. I'm not sure. He talks about judgment and says that judgment isn't a bad thing. And it's I think it was in the foreword or the overture where they talked about, yeah, it was in the overture when Norman Doidge was talking about judgment, and he said that part of Jungian philosophy, part of his writings dealt with a non-judgmental clinical environment where you're doing psychotherapy with a patient and you don't want to introduce judgment, or you don't want to come off as judgmental because that inhibits the process, right? And then since the birth of that philosophy or the putting it out there, the fields of like psychotherapy and psychology have taken it kind of to the nth, in the humanities and stuff, where judgment has become this kind of like taboo thing, where like if you're judging someone, that's like an inherently bad act, because of the way in which Jung treated it. But he qualifies that Jung was being explicit to the clinical setting, and that is an absolute bastardization of what he was saying to take that and apply it to like any other area of life, because judgment is like an ingrained part of the way we shape our world, the way we form categories, the way we see things is by judging them and fitting them into our reality. And if we don't do that, if we cripple that, then it gives us, it inhibits us from like potential like places of knowledge, of learning, or of deciding how to like act on things, because we don't have that process, that ability to fit things into our reality. So he's saying every hero is a judge. Well, we see ideals. We have friends that are ideals. We have people that exist around us, and if they embody the hero for us, or we look at famous or people that are in the public sphere that are quote unquote our heroes, they are our ideals. These people are a judge. We look at them and then reflect back on us, our inadequacies compared to them. So we internalize the judgment from that, and thus can move forward towards maybe attaining those things that we see as ideals. He
Yep.
says, when you dare aspire upward, you reveal the inadequacy of the present and the promise of the future. So
I think it seems to me like the big thing with judgment is that like it's not very useful to judge other people, and it's not very useful to judge yourself compared to like specific other people, but it can definitely be useful to judge yourself like compared to yourself and like compared to like where you want to be and compared to like your
yeah,
ideals and things like that.
I think that's why he says hero, because that's
Yeah.
implying that it's like a pretty ultimate ideal that we're judging against, or that's judging us. That way, it's not us feeling less than in a like day to day way. It's a less than or judgment in terms of our being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're always judging things anyway.
Right.
It'd be very hard to get out of that.
It was cool when I read this. After I read it, I kind of went through the day thinking about how I was thinking, specifically in terms of my judgments and the way I think about judgment. And like, it turns out that a lot of the times when I judge something, whether I'm driving on the road and I see cars that I like, or walking through the restaurant and see people that are attractive or not attractive, when I am judging those people and I'm categorizing them in my head just as a normal process, I'm also judging myself negatively for doing that, because I have this kind of acquired from my environment definition of judgment as a negative thing, which is kind of what he's talking about doing away with, is that you're going to do this. You maybe shouldn't do it, and what you said, like you shouldn't do it critically of people or yourself necessarily on like a day-to-day basis, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a part of being human, and you can be cognizant of that and then transform it into something that you utilize with your ideals and hire your ideals to better yourself. But it's definitely like gives some cool direction to be to implement mindfulness in, to think about the way in which the definition of judgment is expressed in negative ways to myself daily.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I've always sort of thought, or recently anyway, that uh, you can be like constructively judgmental towards yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's like such a thing as being too much of that. Like
Yeah.
as long as you're treating it like they say in this book, where it's like you're someone you're trying to help, like it'd be better to know the things that you're doing wrong, and then at least you can make a decision whether or not you want to change, than to like not just decide you're not allowed to question
Right.
things or make judgments or anything like that.
Yeah. How he applies that to friendship. So that's like talking about judgment, your
Yeah.
ideals being judges, and examples are challenges. He says, don't think that it's easier to surround yourself with good, healthy people than with bad, unhealthy people. With good, healthy people than with bad, unhealthy people. It's not. A good, healthy person is an ideal. It requires strength and daring to stand up near such a person. Have some humility. Have some courage. Use your judgment and protect yourself from too uncritical compassion and pity. Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole thing, to sum up, he's basically like, there's tons of pitfalls. There's tons of things that are demonstrably bad basis for relationships and friendships. Stay away from them. If you think you're going towards them, turn around and go figure out why you're doing that. Go get your shit together. But also, you need to. So when looking for a friendship and you don't see those things, you want to realize that the people that don't fit any of those negative categories, that don't raise any of those flags, are going to be ideals. They're going to be good for you. They're going to be supporting you. They're going to be happy for you when you're happy, and vice versa. And you need to realize that. That way you can not be, you can't, so that way you don't demonstrate those negative things. So you enter into these friendships and relationships with your head up and your shoulders back, but you also have humility. You have courage to be there, and then humility to not like to be like domineering or oppressive in the relationship, because that's how you like move forward, and you do that by using your judgment, because that's how you stray away from delving into those chaotic elements of relationships and turn it into make sure it stays a healthy relationship or friendship.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, like, if you could envision like the perfect best friend, like how like formidable that person might be, and how much like they would like make you want to be a better person too. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. But it's also interesting because if you like, I can think about that now and probably come up with like a reasonably formidable and like goodness inspiring person, right, in my imagination. But I don't know
Right.
if like 6 years ago, I was arguably a baby, but like I don't know that the person I would have come up with then would have been goodness inducing. I don't know that they would have been formidable. But it's
Yeah.
through learning the things he's talking about, through experience, and through books like this, where you see people explaining the constituents of relationships, of being a human animal, of the elements of emotion and the tendencies towards chaos and order, that you begin to understand how to fit those things together in, imagining a better future, a better person, a better friendship, a better you, and then you can move towards it through, using your judgment.
Yeah, and like becoming that person for other people
Right.
and yourself, really.
Thanks for listening. It's been a blast. To get engaged, head over to sequesteredsuperlative.com and subscribe with your email to get all the latest updates, including new book discussion audio, blog posts, and more. So long until next time.